This may be an area where you need statutory revision.
We well could.
I don't know the legalities. I'm not, in addition to not being an IT person, I am probably not a public contracts person either, but we can certainly take a look at it. I look to you actually to propose areas where we need to revise the public contracts code to provide more flexibility in the area of the qualitative analysis to make sure that there's a fit, that the contractor isn't pushing, doesn't have a history or a track record of pushing a particular solution when other solutions appear more appropriate that are less expensive and more effective, for example.
Sure.
What about the contract management office concept that the task force folks spoke about this afternoon? Sort of a centralized operation where sort of a contract HQ.
So what we look for and what we, in evaluating, what's the maturity of an organization to take on a project is, I won't call it a contract management office, but really more of a project management office. And that's because it's more encompassing. Contract management would certainly be part of it, having a dedicated manager managing the contract and making sure that not only the vendor but the state perform to what the requirements of a contract. An example of that might be, per the contract, a vendor is required to deliver a deliverable within a certain time frame. But it also may require that the state has so many days or such a period of time to review and make comments and get back to the vendor with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. A lot of times state departments fall down on that, and they start managing outside of what the requirements of the contract are. So the idea I think that the task force was trying to get to here is you need somebody looking at the contract and managing to it and making sure both sides live up to the terms of the contract. And that's certainly something that we support. And as we evaluate, whether we let departments take on projects, we want to see that as part of a project management office. The project management office would have other things besides that as well. So, for example, they would have to have a group in there that's focused on how you make organizational changes within the department. That's managing, changing everything from training workers to preparing, workers for when the system comes in. This is how it's going to affect the way you do your job. You're going to do it differently now. So managing that aspect of it, and it includes everything from communicating outward to say, look, in 2 months we're going to be testing the system, so you guys need to be ready to come in. And we need to know that you've developed some really good test scripts or test cases that we can run through the system. Or, you need to really focus on cleaning up the data in your old systems because it's going to be transferred over in 2 months. So there are other aspects of what would be in a project management office, but it would include contract management. And so it's a recommendation we support, and one of the things we look for today when we review and approve projects.
But it's not a function that the Department of Technology currently performs.
We don't do that on the projects that are out there. The centralized function that we perform on the contracts is in the procurement phase, to make sure that
specifications are clear.
Specifications that they're using a model contract or, the right terms and conditions. Once a project is in flight, that really needs to reside with the organization managing the project. Now, in the case of OSI, where they manage the projects for other departments, the contract management function happens at OSI. So presumably if there is a big state central technology or project management office, you would have that there too.
And if that happened to come about, do you have any idea or thought as to what increase in staffing you would require in order to perform that function?
The way that it works today in OSI is essentially the level of resources that would normally have been, let's say it's a Department of Mental Health or something, or Department of Healthcare. If the resources that would have gone over to healthcare to run the project, those resources are redirected to OSI. So it would be the same level. Now, you do harvest some efficiencies out of having a centralized office, right? So presumably some lower level of staff. So it really varies based on the size of a project.
Well, I would assume, without really knowing, that the skill set necessary to manage a large scale IT project, whether it's for the controller or DMV or EDD or anybody else, is a different skill set than the skill set needed to deal with the day-to-day IT issues that crop up inside the department.
Day-to-day operations. It is. It very much is.
So to the extent an agency has somebody with the skill set necessary to manage a large IT project, at least some portion of that skill set sort of wasted a lot of the time.
I don't disagree with you, and in fact, they are fundamentally different skill sets. They're both very important, but they do different things. And in fact, what happens even at OSI, a lot of times they'll get position authority, and then they fill those positions with by recruiting and filling. If a department has somebody with project management experience or somebody who's a good contract manager, they might move over to OSI into the appropriate position. But in reality, that's what happens is you get a mix of staff who have certain skill sets, and you get position authority, which you then go out and recruit and fill.
So, Director Ramos, I have, before you pass out, I thought I'd close it up. Have I failed to ask you any questions, or have I failed to give you the opportunity to address any issues that you care to address?
Well, only not really. I don't think you failed to ask me anything, but I did want to, like I said, point out the report came out in August, 8 months ago. And so we've been working very diligently since then, and actually even before then, to implement the recommendations. So I think what you will see is that we have done something in almost every one of these areas and have more yet to do. But fundamentally, that's based on us looking at what's working and what's not working in the technology portfolio, either through our own assessments, through the independent assessments that have come either from other projects or that we've commissioned, and just through our own, ongoing oversight. So you have seen some changes. You will see more. We're in the process of making changes to the procurement process as well. We've done earlier. Senator Berryhill was talking about, breaking up big procurements into smaller procurements. We've done that. We've done that in our CalNet procurement. And what happened was we got better competition and we pre-qualified vendors for that, and we pre-qualified a large number of vendors for it. So you're going to see more of those sorts of things coming. We're not always going to get it right the first time. So there'll be times when we try something and it doesn't work, and we're going to have to come back and tweak it. So we'll try to be very open and honest about that, and we would just ask that you give us the latitude to try and be innovative and to not always get it right.
We don't get it right over here, so I wouldn't expect you to get it right either all the time. I want to commend you. Thank you, ma'am, for coming. I want to commend you, Director, for your efforts and for your patience this afternoon. You didn't pass out on me.
I'm getting close, though.
Thank you.
I'm sure you heard my stomach grumbling a couple of times.
Thank you for
right.
staying with me. We look forward to receiving the reports that you referenced, both the self-assessment of your department and the assessment from the Controller's Office when it surfaces. Rest assured that this subcommittee and the full Budget Committee, I'm confident, and the legislature is certainly willing to work with you on any statutory revisions that are needed in order to implement the task force report recommendations on project improvement. And all I can say is we have got to get this IT issue right in the state of California. The stakes are too great. Thank you very, very much, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any public comment? Any comment from anybody else before I adjourn this subcommittee and we all pass out? Anything? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Senator Roth and staffers, I'm Jan Ross. I'm the Chief Information Officer from the State Controller's Office.
Thank you for attending.
And I appreciate the fact that it's been a very long day for you, and I certainly don't want to belabor it, but we have taken a great deal of time to do our own inward look at lessons learned relative to the recommendations made by the task force. Good. And Carlos Ramos was correct when he said that we had submitted a preliminary assessment to your staff, and that was last summer. It was not an external independent assessment because the controller has been a very frequent and advocate of conducting an independent assessment and an assessment internally as well on several levels. And we had requested that funding through the budget concept proposal process through the governor's budget, and we were denied that funding to conduct the independent assessment at this time. And in fact, when we were denied, DOF originally said that they would support the legal funding but not the independent assessment. They have since reversed that position and come back and said we should be funded for both. And as soon as we have that funding, we are very interested in conducting that independent third-party assessment. And the controller has frequently said, as he's advocated from the very beginning, from the time that we released SAP, that he wants to know if SAP is the right COTS platform. He wants to know what's salvageable. He wants a fit gap analysis done, and he wants to analyze the state's business processes, including those that require bargaining and statutory authority, and analyzing the scalability of what our investment is now and how it would meet that. So
I think that's a great idea. In fact, I commend the controller for being interested in doing that, because I do think that there are aspects of the self-assessment that can be conducted, the product of which would be very, very valuable in not only assessing what we do in the controller's office with the payroll system, but what we do in other departments without jeopardizing the ongoing litigation and the issues that are present in that, whatever those are.
We agree.
So I look forward to getting the finalized self-assessment report covering the issues that you've addressed and the issues that have been suggested by the LAO. And
we hope that that's approved in the governor's budget, and we can begin that immediately upon approval.
That's probably this subcommittee, I would think. So if it isn't, I will investigate, and if it is,
excellent,
we'll be talking about it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Yes,
Tony
sir.
Davidson, Project Director. I just want to clear the record a little bit with accountability, because as the Project Director, there's 150 staff that worked for me on that project, and accountability rests with me.
You weren't around, though.
I wasn't around from the outset, but I've been here for the last 2 years. And so if I could just explain briefly what I went through, and I'm glad that Director Ramos had shared that his staff were embedded in the project, both his staff, his independent oversight, as well as independently contracted IB&B. Those folks had free access to anyone on my staff and the vendor staff and any meeting where the state and the vendor met at. So they sat in on everything. They also reported directly to our steering committee as well as our project management. So if issues arose, they were addressed all the way up to our steering committee, sometimes not to the satisfaction of everyone involved, but we would go back to our contractor. And if SAP addressed the issues to the satisfaction of project management, then we moved forward. With regard to going forward on the project, after testing, before we went live, there were 322 separate go-live items that we'd been tracking. Okay, 99% of those were green and ready to go from both our customers and our business partners, and we went through reviews of that at the project level, and then at the executive project level, and then at the steering committee. And Director Ramos was there as a non-voting member, as well as IB&V in the independent oversight. At that time, we were green-lighted to go forward. I had no objective information that I could say, stop, this project should not go forward. And just as offhand reference, because it had been going on so long, and we were going to a small pilot, a lesson learned, by the way, by looking at LAUSD, that to take the right thing to do was to put that software into play and to see what we actually had. That happened in July. We ran into immediate problems. I had a contract with no teeth in it, no liquidated damages, no performance bond, no service level agreements, nothing I could do to grab the vendor and shake them up. I was all over them, and they brought in their red team. They hit the ground on August 3rd, so they'd recognized, they heard us. We weren't just sitting back. So they couldn't resolve those problems. And again, I had no contractual methodology to do anything. I worked with them and tried to work with them all the way through October 25th when we sent them a very extensive cure letter. Because we wanted to hold their feet to the fire. And because I had no other means to do it, curing them via the contract was the only tool available to me at that time. We doubled the time response so that they could get it worked out and come back to us and present how they were going to fix this and get this project back on track. Because at the time, that project burn rate was $64 million a year. Okay? So they came back and they said, there's no problem with the system. It's all on you. It's nothing. So, I mean, you've seen the response. Okay? So even after that, we were very diligent before we took the next step, and we tried to work it out. They could never deliver a corrective action plan with their own recommendations in it that was satisfactory to move this project forward. My choices at that point were to move forward with these guys and incur costs at $64 million a year with problems that could not be corrected by the supposed experts of this system, or to terminate the contract. We terminated the contract. Even after terminating that contract, that went all the way through February 8th. So from November 30th to February 8th, they still couldn't correct it after they knew they were in serious trouble. After that, we went to contractual required mediation. From the time in July when we brought these problems to their attention to when we filed our suit, which was after the mediation ended, was 18 months. They'd been given every opportunity to cure this, to fix this, to work something out. It was simply not workable. They cannot fix the problems that they created. And it left us, because we had no other options in the contract, that was really all we could do. So I just want to share that with you, because I did try to be as accountable as I could, respecting the taxpayers' money, recognizing that a lot of money had been spent, but there were limited options. And going forward at a rate of $64 million a year, and then taking that out on their recommendation to a larger population of 15,000 people was clearly not the right thing to do. The easy thing to do, from my perspective, and the individual sitting in my chair, would have been to make a recommendation to say, oh, you know what, these guys will fix it. They couldn't fix it. They would have fixed it. So I just wanted to share that with you, Chairman.
Well, and I don't know, hopefully I didn't say anything any time at any of these hearings to suggest that I'm a defender of your contractor. I think, though, that you have highlighted a few issues that really need to be worked out in a lessons learned session. It's very difficult to do a lessons learned review from the dais in a subcommittee hearing. It's really not the appropriate place to do it. We're not the appropriate people to do it because we don't understand. We weren't on the ground. I'm not an IT person. That's why I depend on you in the controller's office. I depend on the Department of Technology. I depend on consultants that you bring in, people like the task force folks, to sit down at a table and sort of work out lessons learned. So I'm comforted by the fact that the controller intends to do that. I look forward to receiving the report. I know you'll be participating. You referenced some very interesting points on contract provisions that didn't allow you the appropriate tools to enforce your contract, to bring about corrective action, to ensure appropriate response and contract performance on the part of a contractor. I think that's what the task force people are sort of talking about. So hopefully you will get I'm sure you already have it, the task force report. You'll sit down with the appropriate people and at some point have the kind of conversation that gives us a list of what I call lessons learned. Doesn't matter what happened, who did it, who didn't do it, but lessons learned so we can distribute it across the board in California to departments and agencies, deleting the names to protect the innocent, but to say, listen, when you're doing one of these things, as long as we have a decentralized IT procurement process in the state of California in terms of the actual project, here's what you need to be careful of. And it's a shame that somebody has to be the one to learn the lessons, but that's how it always is for all of us, regardless of your field. So thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Chairman.
I would like to say that that is the reason that the controller and the governor commissioned the task force, is because they realize there is so much at stake, and there is a great wealth of lessons learned. And I'd be happy to come back at some other time if you want to hear what we felt were the most salient recommendations relative to our experience.
Well, I hope you put them in a report, and
We-
I realize
will.
that we may get two versions of the report if litigation's ongoing, and there probably are certain things. But as I indicated the
Certainly.
last time we had one of these sessions, I would think that now that we're in litigation, the positions have sort of solidified, and they're being stated in the form of answers to interrogatories and depositions and everything else. So at least those positions ought to be capable of being inserted in a lessons learned report.
Well, and one comment that I would like to make when you've talked about the timeliness of an assessment and the idea that we might lose relevant project resources, or how we would manage them if they are centralized in an OSI model. I just would like to refresh you, or maybe you will recall last week when we were listening to the testimony from Fiscal and some of our other budget proposals. We talked about these positions being funded as limited term positions. So for our enormous project, those positions are only funded a year at a time. And it's very difficult for an incentive to hire and attract the right people when they know, as you said last week, that that job may be ending in a year. And when the project was suspended and our request was not funded for the assessment, we were downsized, and our funding was restricted just to those people that can support the legal effort. So those people that are most skilled in these project areas immediately abandoned ship, and many of them have moved on to the Fiscal project. There's just
Which is my point about being completely uninformed on this area and not an information technology person, which is my point about the centralization of the IT procurement management process, contract management, procurement, and all the rest, and whether we shouldn't gather all the best and brightest in the state of California, house them in one department or agency, pay them appropriately, and I'm sure, given the state of California and information technology, we will keep them more than fully employed.
and we are looking to see that process improve and make it better for that portfolio of projects that are out there.
But on the issue of the assessment, I know we've approved. We're considering. I guess maybe we approved it. I forget. But we have some contract folks that have corporate memory with respect to your project. I'd certainly like to see the assessment take place, at least as to their corporate knowledge, before they disappear and go someplace else, and we lose the ability to capture what you don't know because you weren't here, sir, and what you may or may not know, ma'am. Make sense?
Yes,
Yes.
it does. It's a point well made.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for calling my attention to those issues, and I look forward to working with both of you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Chairman.
much.
If there's nothing else and no further comment, we will adjourn this hearing. Thank you all for your patience.